Hi, good morning, everybody. For those of you who came for a life-changing talk by Rich Kessner on goals, I'm sorry he's not here, but I'll try to do my best. Today we're going to talk about SDT and technology, and this is an area that has been really a passion of mine for, honestly, since I was at grad school, hiding across the hall from Rich, my advisor at the time in the 80s, on my Mac playing video games instead of doing my research. I've always been kind of a closet technologist. About 15 years ago, just to give you a little bit of background, we started a company called Immersive, and we sort of call ourselves an applied behavioral sciences firm to the world. Right before I started my second year postdoc, I jumped ship and just wanted to go off and do something that was more entrepreneurial and commercial, and have been for the last 20 years doing various versions of that. But this company started in 2003, and really the focus here is very specifically, and that's why it's great to present to this audience, because it really is a vehicle for trying to move self-determination theory into the world in very practical ways. Like, how can we be applying this in commercial settings, in consumer products, in business-to-business offerings? How can we figure out how to get this into the world and scale it? And we've been applying this in a lot of different areas over the years, and we're doing stuff in healthcare. We've worked with finance companies. I have a couple of examples as we go along. Sports, interactive technology. Video games is one that we're pretty well known for, doing a lot of the early video game work. And that also, as I advance through middle age, that helps to keep me a little bit cool and relevant with the kids. But at least it makes me think that I'm remaining cool and relevant to the kids. So really, for about every year, we also get to see a lot of different products out there. What's really awesome about our practice is because we're sort of apply horizontally across all these areas, we probably work, I would say, on 50 technology or software projects a year. And increasingly, and this is another great thing about working with SDT and technology is always changing and developing, right? But guess what? What we know is that basic needs. How long have we been talking about the three basic needs? It's been decades now, right? And we've got these fundamental needs happening. It creates this great platform, even as technologies emerge and evolve, to be able to keep kind of an even keel and a constant keel, and just figure out how do they apply in different contexts. And so we've even been working with the Oculus and with the Facebook division, and trying to help them figure out a lot of these new VR technologies and other things that are actually pretty cool. Ed, during his talk last night, talked about the growth of self-determination theory, which has always been really exciting for all of us. We started, this is kind of the first part of that story, we started Immersive right around this point, and we really started it with the hope and expectation that self-determination theory was going to grow and become more important. And of course, we saw this graph grow over the last few years, and the conference grow. We've seen lots of graphs about that. But the question is, why? Why has this been growing like this? And the most obvious answer, and I'm sure the most correct answer, is because we're all very brilliant people who have done amazing work. So that obviously is the answer. But let's explore some other things that have been happening in the world. And if you think about pretty much any domain, I'll just give a couple of examples here, how things were. So I remember when I was a kid and I went to the doctor's office, you pretty much had to just, you didn't feel well and you went to the doctor's office, and you had to just wait there for the doctor to dispense his or her knowledge as to why you were sick. You couldn't do what you do now, which is, print out, an inch-thick binder from your PubMed search, because you absolutely know that you've got that rare African disease, and bring it into the doctor. And you couldn't really participate, right? You had to just wait for that knowledge to be dispensed. Similarly, when you wanted to watch a TV show, if you wanted to watch, when I was a kid, Happy Days, you better show up Wednesday at 7:30 and turn on ABC, or guess what? You didn't get to watch Happy Days, right? You just didn't. There weren't VCRs. So again, you had to revolve around the schedule of all the media and TV companies. And then also classrooms. I remember even when I was still in my academic days and doing some teaching, you would stand up in front of students, and students would be there, kind of a captive audience. They had notepads and pens, and they had to listen to you. And they couldn't, they didn't have devices, and they couldn't be distracted, and they were sort of a captive audience. So I guess you didn't have to be interesting, right? Because They were stuck or they had to walk out. That was how things were, right? How things are now. So essentially we had to, all these people, it was like we had to revolve around all these institutions in pretty much every domain. Right? The individual really wasn't as empowered. Now we have all kinds of cool apps and things on our phone. I'm wearing 8 devices that track my biometrics and my sleep. And I can be like, ooh, how am I doing today, right? I'm learning all these things about myself. This app was one that's not around anymore, but literally it came out and you were supposed to be able to hold the phone up to your head to diagnose whether you were having a stroke or about to have a stroke or something. That one didn't make it, but we're trying different things with technology. But there's all these ways in which we can kind of get information. TV, we have some big network clients, and oftentimes we'll go talk to them, and we'll say to them, why do you need to exist anymore? Or why do I need TBS, and I guess we're in Europe, so BBC or something, to tell me to watch Father Ted at 7:30. Am I getting all those shows right? I'm trying to pick European shows. Because I can watch whatever I want at any time, right? I am completely in control. I'm the one that creates my media universe. And again, education, now the classrooms all look like this. And I remember when I went back and guest lectured and I saw these laptops open, it's like, you better be interesting or else the students are going to be playing a video game or on Facebook or doing whatever the kids do these days. I don't think it's even Facebook anymore. But the reality is that the world in every domain, what technology has enabled in all these domains, and I could keep giving lots of examples of this, is that things need to now revolve around us as individuals. We can create our own experience, or we can create our own world. And we don't have time to go into all the positives and negatives of that, but if you think about that, that's incredibly empowering. And as Rich and I were thinking about that one night, the idea of this being kind of a Copernican turn, which is a nice turn of phrase that Rich came up with for this, which is, instead of us being in sort of orbit around all these big media institutions, now we are the center, right? We are the center of things. And what that means is that empowerment, which technology gave us, this is where there's kind of this reciprocal relationship, is it fed something back into technology, which is now technology has to understand us individually a lot better. It's not enough to simply make up the rules. Now motivation, implicitly, even if you couldn't put your finger on it, implicitly understanding the needs of the individual and meeting each individual where they are in each of these domains becomes increasingly important, because guess what? If you don't do that, then the person's just going to go away. They're going to turn to an alternative. It's literally, just a flick of their finger and they're off to some other thing, right? So it's very important. So if we go back to this chart for a minute, think about the fact that I'm just going to layer some things on. Right around this, during this same epoch of growth, you've got social media being invented, right? So Facebook, other things coming along. You have Indeed, you've got job searches, the ability for people to find employment in different ways. Then you've got smartphones kind of drop like a meteor out of the sky on all of our lives, right, in 2007. It's amazing to think that they haven't been around longer than that, given how central they are to all of us. Then you've got streaming media services that start coming on the scene. You've got these sort of peer-to-peer services like Uber and Lyft, and you can just order anything from your phone. I bet somebody could order a pizza right now, and by the time I'm done, a pizza would arrive, right, in the auditorium. You've got healthcare on demand. You've got education on demand, Udacity, Coursera, all these other things. Now you've got cognitive computing. So if you plot these things, I think, of course, I know this is a very empirically minded audience, and this is more kind of correlational type stuff. I'm not saying that these things cause self-determination theory to grow, but I do think it's very, interesting. And I can tell you, we work with most of these companies, and I can tell you the reason that they work with us is because they've said we need to understand what's going on. We need different models to try to get to people. So technology really does need self-determination theory, and even beyond just technology as an abstract thing, all these companies, all these different exciting things happening out there that we use really need self-determination theory as well. Because developers are generally pretty bad at understanding what's going on with their audiences, right? So when we talk to commercial companies, you sort of make a thing, you put it out into the world, and then people either like it or they don't like it. But if you try to ask, well, why does somebody like it or don't like it, they actually think it's this mystical black box, right? They actually don't really understand what's going on. So what we've been able to do in our work is go to technologists and say, using self-determination theory, we can shine a light into that black box. we understand what's going on, right? So we can say, hey, if needs and fulfillments and other, high motivational quality, if those things are lighting up, guess what? Those things lead to those positive outcomes. And we see this across all the domains in which we work. And of course, when things are thwarted or aren't satisfied, we see things going in a negative direction. So for the first time, we're able to give technologists a tool set in self-determination theory to help them understand their user and their customer experiences that they've never had. I'm not going to go over the 3 needs because anybody that doesn't know the 3 needs should be forcibly ejected from the conference. But at this point, but when we're talking about technology development and app development, we're helping look at things like how is the technology supporting or encouraging users to build, sometimes we call it a personal narrative. What is the personal narrative that they're telling as they're using that technology, whether it's playing a game or whatever they might be doing, that makes them feel like this is their own, right? This is a real volitional narrative for themselves that they can identify with. How are we creating an environment where we're not controlling people versus with carrots and sticks, right? There was a whole movement called gamification a few years ago that was about like layering badges and all kinds of external crap on top of applications. I don't know if anybody familiar with this, you probably ran into it. And all SDT people, when they would see this, be like, oh my God, this is the worst motivational thing. Because we're so annoying to those in our lives in this way because we're running into it all the time. But we've really helped to move away from that to more meaningful things, right? Can I provide meaningful choice? I'm just going to go through these quickly because God knows you know a lot of these strategies. But when we're working with developers, one of the things I want to say, which has been really awesome in this work, is that every day a developer goes to work and they sit down in front of a computer and they have to type in code to do very small little things. And so all the work that we have to do, if it's going to be relevant, we can't just talk at an abstract level. We need to be able to say, what does autonomy mean in the context of this mechanic? What does relatedness mean in the context of this feature or this design thing? So it forces us to get really in the weeds to understand how is the mechanic that we're involved with going to achieve these things? How can I be sure that, for example, in relatedness, I'm not just creating a lot of features that might foster, kind of shame or guilt or some of these kind of socially awkward things, right? I'm going to flip over to competence for a moment. And I want to kind of talk about, I'll just put all 3 of these up for a moment, and say that when we're working in competence, I'm going to drill down as an example of getting into this level of detail. So we look at similar questions about, are we providing structure and scaffolding? But one of the things that we've incubated as we've done this work iteratively is we kind of have what we call a competence ramp that this is just an example of how we get into details with developers, which is the first thing, if we want to understand competence, you want to onboard somebody to a technology experience, is number 1, schema. Do they understand what this program is? Are they able to mentally map what the heck is going on or what is it supposed to do, right? This is an entry point, even beyond the normal things we talk about with competence of efficacy and growth and those things. This is kind of the starting place, is do people have that schema? Then we move on to talk about efficacy, which is, am I capable of successfully, achieving success in the tasks and activities in front of me? And then skill, which is, okay, I can get things done, but am I good at these things? And mastery is, am I actually really good at these things? I can help other people. I begin to identify with this idea of being a master in this area. And by differentiating these things, what we found when we're working with technologists is that we sort of have this almost this dependency, right? This hierarchy that they can really relate to, which is, all right, are you familiar with the game Jenga? This is a game that kids play in the US, but you kind of have this Jenga situation where when you're thinking about interactive technology and these new experiences, first thing you need to start with is schema, because if people don't have a schema, then all the other things break down, right? You can't feel efficacious, you can't feel skillful, right? Once you have schema in place, then you move on to efficacy, because if you don't have efficacy, you have no pathway to feel skillful and then feel a sense of mastery. You can see where we're going with this. And so we kind of work through this taxonomy of competence that we can then apply and that developers can be thinking about in developing technology. If skill breaks down, then mastery breaks down. So all of this, what this has done, and I put this out there, what I don't have that, and I feel inadequate because, Nikki and everybody else puts up these slides with lots of beta weights and numbers and all kinds of cool things. I'm not going to do that in this presentation, We do a lot of research behind the scenes, but I'm mainly throwing out the fact that one of the things when we're doing commercial work is we're just iterating really quickly on these concepts and ideas in order to get to practicality. And I wanted to walk through this particular one because I'm interested, in this group, if this sort of relates to other people's experiences, or maybe there's somebody here who's like, wow, that seems great. Let's test that more. Let's test those ideas in other contexts, because we're so busy out there trying to just get stuff done for these developers. We often just kind of iterate on the ideas, and we don't have the bandwidth to do a lot of the basic science. We have to circle back to that just when time allows. So if anybody's interested in testing some of the ideas, let me know. I want to talk a little bit about the retirement industry as just an example of how we apply the model in app development. How do you motivate people to save money? It's a really interesting problem. And the other reason I wanted to bring this up is there's an opportunity here for SDT to not just help build more video games and cool things to distract us, but to help use technology to work towards things that are really important and that are really social goods, right? In the retirement industry, this is in the US, what I learned when I started working with this is a project we did with Prudential, which is a big financial firm, I think even worldwide, is that they spend about $100,000 over the life of an average worker trying to get them to save for retirement, just with marketing and packages and all kinds. It's an enormous amount of money. At the same time, the average retirement account at retirement is $30,000 US. That is woefully inadequate for somebody to retire, right? Particularly in the US, where there aren't, if you don't have that money, you're pretty much out of luck. So 6 in 10 people in the US are retiring without enough money for retirement. It's really kind of a scary statistic. But one of the major issues is that the retirement industry, and when they build these applications and these advertising campaigns and this technology to try to pull people in to the process of saving for retirement, is they don't really have a model for how to do it. And I'm going to go over some of the deep, after all these years and spending all this money, these are the great insights that the retirement industry has come to. The first is the best way to get people to understand to save for retirement is to show them old people wearing all white outfits walking on the beach. Old people wearing white outfits walking on the beach. This is a very big deal. So this was the first thing. That didn't work out very well. So then they realized that, I know what'll do it. Let's get Adirondack chairs that are empty facing a body of water. And so we did that for a number of years, Adirondack chairs facing a body of water. Then somebody got a promotion for figuring it all out. Why don't we just take old people wearing white clothes sitting in Adirondack chairs on the water? But the issue is that this goes on, and this is what happens when you don't have a model, right? Who are these people? These people are not me, right? And so that's the way people react. It's like, these people are not me, right? The second approach is that they'll just sell on fear. And now that I bring these things up, watch, next time you see a retirement ad, it either has the Adirondack chair thing that we just talked about, or this is the second approach, which is fear. Don't outlive your money, right? Are you afraid of living and on the street? So it's kind of like, oh, I better save for retirement. So they use these very fear, guilt-inducing approaches. And when we looked at the application that was doing this for this company, they had had some success, but they were saying we really need to get this going, in a way that's much deeper and much more successful. So we started to look at the process that they were asking in the application. And they would ask things like, at what age will you retire, and how long will you be in retirement, right? Who knows what those two questions equal? When will I die, right? So that's right out of the gate, right? How much money do you need in retirement? I don't know. How competent is anybody to answer that question, right? I have no idea how to do that. What's your risk tolerance for investment? I don't know, risk tolerance. I sometimes run with, so I don't know what that even means. And then they would ask all these things that were from their point of view. How would you like to balance your asset classes? I don't know what asset classes are. So all these things were just essentially inducing fear, right? What we did is we redesigned the experience, and if there are any people who are involved in development, we actually doubled the length of the number of questions we asked people in the app, and the developers were horrified. They're like, no, it needs to be short, because studies show that every time you ask a question, people churn out of the app. And I said, well, maybe that's because you're asking bad questions. Instead, what we need to do is we need to focus on your ability to thrive. we need to also get people to reflect on what do they love to do? What are the things that satisfy their needs? Let's connect with a picture of who they are in retirement. And a long story short is by doing these things, we redesigned the app where all of that framing came first. And within 1 year, it increased the savings rate by 400% through the app. So it was really remarkable. Yeah, thanks. And it's good. And like I said, these are one of the really meaningful projects we do. And so I don't have a lot more time, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about some things I see as future directions. One of the things is that we really are seeing an inflection point in the relationship between technology and self-determination. And I don't just mean self-determination as the theory. I mean self-determination, in general, which is, and I just want to tell this story, and I'm borrowing a lot of this from Shoshana Zuboff's book, Surveillance Capitalism. But in the year 2000, they built this thing called an aware home, which is supposed to interact with you as the inhabitant, right? And so that seems like a kind of in 2000, that seemed like a revolutionary idea. But it was at Georgia Tech. A core tenet of this project was the following, which is it had to be a closed loop, right? There's a clear need to give occupants knowledge and control and protect what's going on and all that information and who they are, right? That was one of the tenets in 2000. Fast forward 20 years to today, where we all have Alexas and Googles and Siris, and in my house, machines will just start talking to me when I haven't even started talking to them, right? So this is a massive market. However, self-determination in this area has all but evaporated. In other words, the terms of service for all these things basically says the opposite, which is we own everything that comes out of this. We own all this data. None of us know this because who reads the terms of service? We can't understand it anyway. So there's this obfuscation of all the things that are going on. This is a real challenge to self-determination. And so essentially we're being used as raw material in this model where the economic benefit and the empowerment, even though we feel somewhat empowered by the technology, there's this massive trade-off to self-determination, right? And because we don't really understand it, that we don't really know how to question these things, right, as they come along. So there's a direct challenge to our self-determination in all of this. I like this quote by her: if the digital future is to be our home, we must make it so. Now, we already see a backlash to this, and we understand why there's a backlash, right? Because self-determination is a thing. And so when we feel controlled and we feel our autonomy is impinged upon, we start. So that's why you've got Mark Zuckerberg, before Congress. You've got all of the scandals going on about data protection and all these different things. GDPR here in Europe, I think, is awesome. It's ahead of the curve in the US, but we're catching up. So essentially, we're drawing these battle lines. How are we going to have this relationship with technology? And this is where I think there's a very important thing at a macro level for SDT to do, because there's a need for what I've called self-determined computing. And I just started playing around with that term. I don't know if it'll stick, but it really came because there's this notion of cognitive computing already out there, which is, hey, we're going to get computers to think like people and use mental processes like people. But something's missing. What's missing is there isn't a soul in cognitive computing. It's kind of like you need to ask the question, what's the commitment to, or what's the understanding of whose goals are we pursuing with all this cognitive computing? Like, what are we doing? Right now, everything is a transaction first, which is these companies that create the technology are doing it for their benefit, not for our benefit. So self-determination theories are a really important voice in all this, not just theoretically, but also we're a science. This can be measured. So when I say self-determined computing, we are able to actually measure these things and put them algorithmically into technology, right? We can measure how needs are being fulfilled or thwarted, or how controlled we are, or our motivational quality, and all these different things. We need to be able to put that taxonomy out there and make it important to technologists. And Dorian Peters and Rich and Rafa Calvo put out the MEDICS model. I think it was just last year, published this paper, which I don't have time to go over in detail, but was really a model for how to understand how self-determination theory can be applied to both adoption, use of technology, but also all the way through to impact on society. So we're getting started with these things. The point that I think is important to take forward is that SDT can form a social contract between technology and technologists and business, and between individuals, for the simple reason that when you think about need fulfillment and need satisfaction, it actually satisfies and ticks the boxes of what technologists and businesses want. They want to have a loyal relationship to you as a customer. They want sustained engagement. They want value. They want to make some money because that's the way capitalism works, et cetera. What we found in all of our research is, guess what? When you create value for people by meeting their needs, they're loyal, right? They give you their business. It's actually a good thing economically for the business. Simultaneously, we know that this is good, and again, I don't need to go over this because you've been hearing about this already quite a bit, is how these same things are going to help across the wellness and the thriving of the individual. So this is sort of an aspirational model. I've talked to a lot of people who have said, this is Pollyanna, it'll never work. But the reality is technology is here to stay. There needs to be some contract and relationship between all of us as human beings and all this technology. And I can't see any better platform for building that relationship than self-determination theory, because focusing on these things is going to bring tangible benefits to both us as individuals as well as to the companies themselves. I think I started 5 minutes late, so I'm going to take 2 more minutes. Is that okay? Who's the gatekeeper of time? Is that okay? You won't kill me? Okay, great. I want to say one other thing for a moment, which is I also want to encourage everyone to start thinking about how we can start leveraging technology to help self-determination theory. I want this out in the world more. I want it applied more. I come to this conference, I see all of this work, and I think, my God, how do we get this out into the world? And technology can be a great way to do that, to try to bring more broad application of self-determination theory. We've developed a technology platform we call Motivation Works, which was specifically built to be able to do the things we do well in SDT, right? Which is make clear measurements of what's going on, be able to score them and understand those scores, and then based on those score profiles, be able to customize and tailor individual content. But what's nice about technology is right now, most of the time that we do that stuff, one of us has to be involved in that process, right? One of the great benefits of SDT is it's so contextualized. It's like, well, let me understand the situation, and that's going to be able to help me understand what to do and how to intervene. The problem is, when you're trying to go broad with something, if your answer is always, well, it depends, you can't program it depends into a computer program. You've got to make decisions about how you're going to get this thing out more broadly. So what we've done, just as an example, is we've taken the internalization continuum, we call it motivational quality. We do this on an employee engagement product that we just put out. And essentially we assign people a motivational quality score, but more importantly, we know underneath that there are these specific profiles on which we can customize using algorithms and other things, tailored feedback for each of the individuals. So if somebody has a very low score because they're feeling external pressure or amotivation, we can focus on relieving those things. If someone has a lot of personal value and intrinsic motivation, but we're able to identify that they've got some external pressure that might be undermining it, we can focus on that particular profile. And if we've got somebody that's sort of higher, but is feeling a bit of introjection, we can customize content and recommendations automatically to fit that profile. So we're very early in this process, but as people think about, hey, I've really come up, you see this great data that's being presented, I've come up with a way to measure these things, and we have this intervention that really works. This kind of technology, this kind of an approach is a way to then take that out into the world and to try it more broadly. And I think that's the relationship, that's the way that as we try to help technology, technology can also be helping us to get SDT out into the world. So that's it for my talk. I'm going to say one other thing, which is that technology costs money. And please also consider giving, making a donation to CSDT. Shannon had mentioned this yesterday morning, but Shannon was very gentle about it because I'm in the commercial sphere. I feel much more open about saying, hey, we need some money to get a thing done. Donate at SelfDeterminationTheory.org. We are building a whole bunch of tools through CSDT in order to provide more technology to help you. So if any of you have ever used the website or downloaded a paper, there's a lot of effort behind that. We're trying to improve it. So I just wanted to make a plug to please go to donate at SelfDeterminationTheory.org. Donate what you can to help build the technology tools to in turn support you. So thank you very much.